Hey friends, and welcome to a very special episode of We Read It One Night, the podcast where two sisters obsess over audiobooks and their narrators. Today we're talking with the one, the only Ilyana Kadushin, also known as the narrator of the Twilight Saga. We get a behind-the-scenes look into what it was like working on this iconic series, advice on how to get into audiobook narration, and we tried to get the juiciest gossip from the audiobook world. As with all our Twilight episodes, the link to donate to the Quileute Move to Higher Ground Fund will be in the description, as well as links to all our Twilight episodes. We're so grateful for Ilyana for coming on the show, and we hope you love listening as much as we enjoyed talking to her. Enjoy the show!
You're actually the reason that I got into listening to audiobooks, because in 2019, me and Allison and our brother did a road trip up the coast of California up to Seattle, and it was like kind of Twilight themed because we stopped in Forks and like a bunch of filming locations. And so on the long driving parts, we were reading the books out loud to each other, like taking turns. But I get really car sick. So like at one point I was like, I don't think I can keep doing this. And Allison was like, okay, let me like download the library app and like we'll see if we can get a Twilight audiobook instead. And then we did, and it was you. And that's just like totally put me back onto reading like in a way that I hadn't since I was a kid. Like I went through like 100 books that year, and then like here we are.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I have some stories about visiting that area of the country, which I can tell you about. Forks in that neck of the woods. And then you're just also reminding me just about how a lot of the letters that I would receive from people when the series started to get really, really popular, not after the first, but kind of as it progressed, were like people from all over, the world who were really listening to the books and learning English.
Oh, wow.
From many, many, many different countries. So yeah, hearing that sort of a lot of people connecting strongly for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's amazing. Hi, listeners. Welcome to another episode here at We Read It One Night. If you have been listening to this podcast for a long time, you'll know that we did the Twilight Saga very, very early in our episodes, and we raved about how much we loved the audiobook narration. And even I was re-listening to that episode, we're like, Ilyana, if you're listening, we'd love to have you on. And guess what? Now we have the amazing Ilyana Kadushin here on the podcast this week.
Hi there. Thank you so much for reaching out and asking me to do this. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
Happy to have you. This is so cool.
In addition to being the narrator of the Twilight books, you're also an activist, and you have a podcast and a radio show and do a bunch of cool things that I was like checking out on your website. So you're a Renaissance woman in the audio world.
Indeed.
So I know, Allison, you had a whole list of questions that we could just march through, but I would first love to hear about your time traveling in Forks, Ilyana, if you want to tell us. Yeah.
So it was I'm trying to remember exactly where it was in the series, because I narrated all the books, all four, starting in 2005. I want to say it was like maybe 2008. So the fandom of Twilight, anytime you have to address this first, when you're involved in something that's like Twilight or Harry Potter or something that's just kind of becomes this stratospheric phenomenon, and it's just so big and translated into over 100 languages and all this stuff, it brings with it like some amazing things, like amazing opportunities and amazing connections with people all around the globe, including I had some fans reach out who were organizing actually the Twilight Fan Symposium that I believe it was their first one that they invited me out, or maybe they had one beforehand. I don't know. But it was the Twilight Fan Symposium. It took place in Forks, which, as most people listening or would know, that's the region of the United States
Mhm.
where the Twilight books took place. And so they invited me to come out, do like read aloud from the book, do audiobook signings, talk to fans, just like be around. And they had an amazing whole schedule of events, like everything from meeting tribal, was it Quileute Beach?
Quileute? Yeah, the
Quileute.
Quileute.
Yeah.
There
I
you
think Quileute
go.
Reservation,
It's been a
yeah.
while since I've narrated the book, so
Yeah.
some of those names are. So meeting tribes on those beautiful beaches. To they rented out a high school in Forks, and they did the whole all these really cool events, and it was amazing. I said yes because number one, like that area of the country is so beautiful. And I really wanted to
Mhm.
go out. And I also loved the opportunity of meeting people who loved Twilight and being asked to do that. So I was flown out there, and I actually took my family with me so that we could, when I was done working and appearing at the symposium, we could go and vacation in the area because it is just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
The Olympic Peninsula and the whole region that Stephanie set these books in is just magical. And I love nature and forests, and I love that kind of topography anyway. So seeing it, I could see why she was so inspired. And it was just super, super fun and so much fun. Like they showed the movies, and I attended one of the screenings. It was like they had a lot of activities, and
Yeah.
so they showed the movies, and people were saying the lines out loud like they would the Rocky Horror Picture Show,
Mhm.
that and making fun of certain things and kind of having fun with things. And so it was hilarious for me to sit in the back of the theater and watch people, cheese out over the movies. And, but yeah, that was an awesome trip. It was really, really a cool, and then when it was the 20-year anniversary, I did the Comic-Con in New York City. And that was epic compared to the Twilight Fan Symposium, which felt very intimate and like cool. This was just like the massive Comic-Con in New York City, and
That's amazing.
we signed audiobooks and did that whole thing. But yeah, the Forks trip was very special.
That's
Mhm.
awesome. Did you go in the summer? Or like what time of year was it?
Yeah, I believe they did it. Yeah, I'm almost positive it was June or July. It was just like everything was super lush and
And like
just
You're
sunny for
guaranteed
once.
to have,
Yeah.
yeah, the best
yeah,
weather.
yeah, exactly.
That's
Although
so
there were moody
Yeah.
kind of rainy days. It was
Mhm.
lush. It wasn't like sunny all the time, but everything was very
Yeah.
lush. And it was just hysterical seeing the small town of Forks, which,
hmm
literally just had like high
Yeah.
school, diner, the hardware store,
Yeah. But
The
they're
Twilight,
obsessed with Twilight
the
there.
Twilight
Like they,
memorabilia store.
yeah, they have like the trucks, Bella's trucks, like lined up at the entrance, and like Twilight stuff sold in like every store.
Yeah, the red truck. They took a picture of me in front of the red.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. I know every so often I'll think about it or like look back at those pictures and be like, wow, it'd be so amazing to live up there. But I have to bring myself back down to reality because I could not survive without the sun for that long.
Rachel
We
is
were there
very
in the
much a
summer,
Bella.
obviously. Yeah. Bella at the beginning of the books, not by the
Yeah.
end. But
Yeah.
yeah, eternal summer in the Olympic Peninsula would be great. But
So
that does
beautiful.
not exist. Yeah.
Port Angeles,
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
it was like the Olympic National Forest, and just that whole thing was just
hmm
stunning. Anyone that's listening to this, you'll just, if you haven't,
Mhm.
just even go and look at pictures, because
Yeah.
you'll just see why we're waxing so much about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of Port Angeles, I wonder whether so I don't know if you know this, but or if you remember from the books. I feel like I've had experiences that like for some reason this is a memorable small detail, but that Bella gets mushroom ravioli in the first book. And that restaurant actually exists, which I don't know whether Stephanie knew when she was writing, but like La Bella Italia, and they do have phenomenal mushroom ravioli. So if you ever go back, you got to go to Port Angeles and
Yeah.
get the
That was
mushroom
so
ravioli.
funny. I think I'd forgotten about mushroom ravioli, but that once you said the name of the restaurant, that
Mhm.
really rang a bell. I was like, oh yeah, she had dinner. It's awesome. I had, the pleasure of meeting Stephanie a couple of times during the process of this. Like once was, I think, when I was first cast to do the first book, Twilight, she came, it was in New York City, and she came to the recording studio where we were working just to like listen and hear what was going on. Primarily, I think, just in terms of capturing the essence and capturing Bella. So I got to meet her at a studio, and then there was another couple of times where I would often do Barnes and Noble, that bookstore, do a lot of their book releases for Twilight. They would do special events and readings, and I think Breaking Down was the big like countdown to Breaking Dawn in the bookstores. But much earlier on, she was doing an event at a bookstore, and I just popped by because I knew she was going to be there. And I was like, "Hey, how you doing?" And she was like, "Oh, if I'd known that you were going to come here, I would have had you read instead." Not so she's a relatively shy person, who's really thrust into the spotlight with this series. So yeah, she was like, "These are hard for me," and she goes, "I know it's no big deal for you." That stuff.
It's a great plague of like the modern authors, that they have to be like public figures as well. They can't just like be hobbits who write in their rooms and never come out.
Well, indie authors, I mean, I've worked, since doing Twilight, I've worked with a lot of indie authors doing their audiobooks. Like I'll get offered different book projects, and if I really connect to it, even if it's an independent author, I've done it. And I think for them it's less of a big deal. And I imagine that Stephanie never, I'm sure those stories are out there. I've heard her talk about it in interviews when they were first passing around the idea or the manuscript to publishers. I don't think it was immediately understood or taken. I think it took her a while. There were some people that passed on it, and so I don't think she probably in her wildest imagination knew that it was going to become what it became.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody did. It was huge at the time. And I mean, and there's a Twilight Renaissance going on right now. I don't know if you've like seen the discourse, but like you were saying with the movie at that fan event in Forks, how people were, quoting and also kind of like making fun of things. I feel like we've reached that point in the Twilight discourse where like we can make fun of it, and it's not sort of the sexist mean making fun of it that was so big. I feel like when the books and the movies were first coming out, now it's just like we love the series and we also show our love by pointing at how silly it is sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that was one of the other reasons I liked going out to that symposium in Forks, was meeting those fans, and somewhat at the Comic-Con, the big Comic-Cons, but more so at the Twilight Symposium, because I would ask people, one of the great reasons I loved going to those events is I really genuinely liked asking people why they connected so much to the books, like what it was. And, whether it's mothers and daughters reading it together, different ages. And it wasn't just everybody, I think, just assumed it was like teen girls. But, the reality is like I saw all types of people reading that book. And plus lots of different types of people reaching out to me and sending me letters. I realized through that how diverse the people that read it were. And very often, I mean, people said a lot of different things, but I think a common thing at the time, especially from mothers talking about liking reading it with their daughters, was that in our culture, things are can be so hyper sexual, so hyper kind of exposed, and like not a lot of restraint, that they felt in taking in the story. And when you know who Stephanie is and her background, you understand where that came from. Like even though it was like this rich fantasy life and rich imagination, there was still restraint. There was still it's not like I would call it Victorian and prudish, but in
Mhm.
comparison to America and its sort of hypersexual, hyper-exposed
Mhm.
world, I think it was something that people felt like they could read of all ages. And it was about more than just getting satisfaction right away. It was
Mhm.
about yearning, and it was about imagination and mortality and what it meant to be a young woman and what it meant to be, just all these questions and things that I think that were being grappled with, and magic and having special abilities. And so I found that to be kind of the most interesting, to find out why
Mhm.
people, and I would ask you the same thing. Why did you love it so much?
Well, you could say that it's Edwardian and prudish, not
Oh my
Victorian.
God.
True, very true.
You want to go first, Allison?
Yeah, I mean, I read it in the sixth grade, and like I think all the books were out by that point. I remember like my a summer camp counselor being like, Breaking Dawn comes out this week and I'm at camp and I can't read it. I can't go get it. But I like read them all in 48 hours and stayed up all night just devouring them. And I think, obviously we're a romance novel podcast, so we both love that sort of romance storyline. And I feel like Twilight captures that like longing and yearning and teenage angst of like first love. So with so much heart, like it feels like, yeah, like teenagers are this dramatic and being like, I will die without you, and like I love you and we're gonna spend our lives together. And then I think also Bella, for me personally, I only recently was diagnosed with autism, but obviously was autistic my whole life. And there's a lot of Bella's characterization, and I don't think necessarily this was Stephanie's intention while writing it, but that feels very indicative of the autistic experience, of like that she has these sensory issues. She's a little socially awkward. Like she feels like she doesn't fit in. She feels like her brain runs on a different frequency. I mean, that's like a quote, and that's why Edward can't read her mind. So it felt, I think Twilight often gets criticized for like being a self-insert, or like Bella's like bland, and but I think that that's what makes the series so relatable, is that you can see yourself in Bella and like go on this sweeping journey.
Yeah, that vulnerability, willing, the klutziness, all the things that were, you could either see as, oh, it's a weakness, or you could see it as endearing, and just part of her character. Um, and I think that's another reason, yes, why people really connected so deeply, is like imperfections that were allowed to just, be. I think you had to really have patience with this
Mhm.
book. These were long books, and so either you wanted to take the journey or you didn't. But yeah, and so tell me why you connected to it so much, or why you do.
Yeah, I don't know. I think so. I read it probably at the same time. Allison's younger than I was at the time. She's actually
I'm
still
still
younger than me
younger.
today, shockingly enough. But I think I just like found the book in her room and I was like, oh, this like looks interesting. I read the back cover and all it said was like it was that quote that's like, I knew
About
that
three
he wanted to
things I
kill
was
me.
absolutely
Yeah.
positive.
And
Yeah.
so I was like, okay, there's like a vampire. Like that's like all I knew going in. And then when I was reading the book, like I guess I was already primed at that point to think that like whoever the first male character introduced would be the romantic lead. And it was like Eric. And I was like, huh, like a vampire with like pimples and like a chess club, whatever. Like that's interesting. This is not what I thought from this. But then but then I don't know, it's just kind of like sucked me in with the, mystery and like the first love. And I think, I don't know, when I think about a lot of my like favorite books and movies growing up, like a lot of it is just for like whatever like weak romance plotline there was. Like I really love The Matrix, not because I'm like into science fiction that much, but just for like the very loose like romance plotline. So I think I just hadn't really like been exposed to that much of that type of storytelling. So Twilight was like one of the first things. And then I think, like, honestly, it just is so fun to have something that so many people know about and can talk about and are excited about. And I kind of imagine it's part of the draw of like being a sports fan, which I've never been, but I kind of wish I was, because it's like having like a convention with people that like the same thing that you do that you can go to really regularly. Like if there was Twilight conventions every week in the fall, so so I think that element of it is fun too.
Yeah, the shared knowledge and shared
Hmm.
connection with that world in total.
Hmm.
Yeah, I really
Yeah.
miss that. Like I miss like midnight release parties for books and
Hmm.
like midnight premieres for movies where everybody dresses up and gets excited. I feel like that doesn't
Hmm.
happen anymore. And I don't know whether it's just because there aren't any series that are like Twilight or Harry Potter and that era was just unique in time, or whether I just grew up and I'm not like a energetic teenager anymore
I think
or what.
most recently, I think it was the Barbie release where people did some dressing up.
That's true.
I
Yeah.
guess there has
Yeah.
to be some sort of really notable aesthetic or
Hmm.
Yeah.
costume or something. And so maybe there's just things that don't necessarily have that notable aesthetic or that notable thing that people would replicate. I mean, I know Dune, that more
Mm.
recently, and I was very fortunate enough to also be in the
Yeah.
Dune cast audiobook playing
That's
Princess
so cool.
Shawnee.
That's
And
amazing.
so I know that with the films more recently has had a thing. I think there's just
Hmm.
Mhm.
cycles for different types of with different art forms, and also maybe post-COVID pandemic, people are just that affected people's willingness to go out and be in community around
Hmm.
Mhm.
certain things in culture.
I mean, I think really sadly, specifically the midnight premiere movies, I'm pretty sure that came to a full stop after the Dark Knight like theater shooting, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the last one. I remember going to that and then like driving home and like hearing about that. And it was movie theaters were kind of just like, all right, well, guess that was nice while it lasted. Guess we're not doing that anymore.
Not doing that
Right,
again.
Which
right,
is yeah,
exactly.
terrifying. That's so cool. I didn't know you did the Dune audiobook. I finally watched the movies after being really resistant for years to reading the book or watching the movies. I think probably because it was just like so many men and told me to do it. And I was like, well, now I can't. But now I actually really like them. Like I watch them both, gonna read the book now, especially if
Well,
you're in
I
it or
recommend
listen to the
the
book. Yeah.
audiobook. So it's a multicast. So I
Hmm.
didn't do, obviously there was a overall narrator was a male, and then there was a bunch of different actors cast
Hmm.
roles. And yeah, that we in 2008, that Frank Herbert's Dune that we all did the audiobook of won the Audie for best sci-fi
Oh, that's amazing.
That's
audio.
awesome.
But I recommend it if there's a lot of, there's
Yeah.
my character and Usul, there's quite a romance
Hmm.
there as
Yeah.
well in that.
Hmm.
And I think it's a pretty awesome audiobook in terms of to recommend.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I'm gonna check it out.
I really do. I found myself reading more like full cast audios like that. Like I've been listening to the Tamora Pierce's The Song of the Lioness series. It's like a children's fantasy, but the only copy of the audiobook that our library has is like the full cast. And I was like, kind of want this with more, especially fantasy books and like
Hmm.
sci-fi books like that. I feel like it really adds a depth to the experience.
It really does. And I entered into the audiobook world. I was already an actor and a voice actor in New
Mhm.
York. And when I sort of discovered, oh, I didn't really even know about this whole thing of audiobooks. And said to my agent, oh, this is incredible. Like this whole phenomenon of narrating, of voice acting and voice performing and narrating, these books. This sounds so amazing. I'd like to do it. And, my my first couple of audiobooks, the first one was actually Vanish by Tess Gerritsen, which was this mystery about trafficked Eastern European women.
Oh, wow.
And Anne Heche narrated was the main narrator of the book. And I was just the only other character. She did the entire book, but I played the young Eastern European woman that was trafficked. So that was like a two-person book, which was very interesting. That was my first. Then Twilight, which was basically one of my first gigs in audio.
Wow.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I auditioned for Twilight, came in to the studio, read the scene where she's in the parking lot of the high school and the car, the
The van.
and
Yeah.
Edward stops it with his hand. And that was my audition excerpt. I read, they wanted to just hear my Bella and my Edward.
Yeah.
And so then I found out that I got that, and they wanted me to do the series of it. And that was very daunting for somebody brand new to audiobooks. Like I said, my very first audiobook was a two-person where I just got to play one little part, which was great because somebody else was responsible. Then Twilight, it was like all on my shoulders. And it was really like playing everyone, being everything in the entire world. And I've done a lot of interviews about Twilight, and I've talked about it in a lot of different ways. And I would say, people would say, well, then how did you handle that monumental task of narrating these really long books with all these characters since you hadn't done that? And I said, I just really, and this then held true for all of the audiobooks that I've done since, which is that I connect emotionally to characters. That's how I find my way in to audiobooks, which is not about doing perfect voices and being like a voice machine and, doing a lot of gymnastics with my voice. It's really about connecting deeply with what I feel like is going on for characters inside. Whether it was Bella, whether it was Edward, whether it was, members of the werewolf pack, the other vampires, humans, creatures, young, old, male, female. It didn't matter. It was really connecting deeply to what they were feeling. And I was most nervous about playing or portraying Edward because I knew that I had a very feminine voice, especially at the time. I was much younger, just starting out in audiobooks. And I felt at the time it was a very light, feminine voice. And I was like, oh, how's this going to be with Edward and other male characters? I just hadn't done that. And I decided to really just focus on who I felt like Edward was deep inside, what he wanted to make other people feel, just everything that was going on with him internally. And I would make a shift in my voice. I would go lower. So obviously an audience would go, oh yeah, that's Edward, that's Bella. And what made me so happy was that over the years, I have gotten many, many messages from people telling me that they loved my Edward, and that they really connected with my Edward. And that made me like probably the most happy. I was like, Bella, whatever, that to me, just, I felt like I could sit in her voice without too much struggle, but like I was worried about him. So having people say, oh, funny messages I would get with people, like they were like, I liked your Edward more than Robert Pattinson. Yeah, just all that stuff cracked.
Yeah. Well, that was one thing I wanted to ask, was because you finished narrating all of the books before the first movie came out. So, are you glad that you sort of got to do your interpretation before, the Kristen Stewart and the Robert Pattinson influences came in?
I am. I think for reasons of just letting them stand on their own, the way the paper books are their own thing, the audiobook is its own thing, the movie, going to conventions, like everything has its own, it's all part of the same franchise, but it each has its own thing. So I am really grateful that those could stand on their own. And I think that also helped with the fans, because I think that they connected deeply with the book and the audiobook. And then there was a lot of divided camps when the films came out of whether people liked them or felt like they did them justice or didn't do them justice. So I appreciated that. And, I would often say to people in interviews, yeah, I mean, we narrated these books and we had no idea. It was actually we knew that the movies were going to come out when we were still just halfway through the series, but still they weren't out. And once people saw them, then that changed everything. And that changed things in an interesting way for an audiobook narrator. I then went on and did a lot of other really cool books, children's book narrations, historical fiction, regular fiction, a lot of other really great books. But when the movies came out, then that kind of cemented me as an audiobook narrator, as the Twilight narrator. And that was both awesome and then also not so awesome, and in the fandom, I would get, total adoration of people just being like, and sending me gifts like Converse, hand-painted Converse sneakers that said like the voice of Twilight with this beautiful, this amazing artist from England who painted the apple and the forest and my name, and a soldier in Afghanistan who sent me a care package and said that he'd been listening to Twilight and to my other books just to kind of relax at night after really, really stressful days in Afghanistan. And those were the things that kind of blew my mind when I went and getting letters from people literally from every country around the globe. But with the films, then there started to be this kind of mean-spiritedness of like, I hate the movies, I hate the audiobooks, I hate, it was sort of this. And I tried not to really pay attention to any of that. And most of the time, people just that actually reached out to me were fans and like very nice people. But it's to be expected when something, blows up.
That's how you made it. Yep.
Yeah,
You got your
people start
first
hating
hater.
you.
Yep.
Yeah. Especially stuff made for teenage girls. It's like the prime target for, it's cool to hate anything that teenage girls love.
Yeah. I don't, again, maybe that was also what people liked about the books was that innocence, like that, and that cruelty was really seen as cruelty in it, and that there was a vulnerability. And so again, anything that kind of comes out that kind of offsets itself from the rest of popular culture, it does draws a lot of attention because it's offering kind of, just a different feel, a different
option.
world.
Yeah.
Would you, there's been rumors abounding for years, that Stephanie was going to write more books in the series. And obviously we got Midnight Sun recently. And now there's rumors that, she's going to write more books. So like, would you come back to narrate? I don't know if she's going to write another book from Bella's perspective, but even like Renesmee, would you want to come back and like do that? I would want you to personally, but if you want to do that.
Well, that's lovely. Yeah, I'm always willing to be a part of the Twilight world. And I think it was really interesting when she did the Edward perspective. I think that's what happens every time where there's kind of this longing, to get back to that idea of longing, of people wanting to just kind of expand the story and keep it going and look at the story from different perspectives. And sometimes that means that they want different voices and like new takes on it. But yeah, I would be happy to do it if that possibility came up.
Had you heard of the books before you went to the first casting event like the first audition?
No, so there was the books were not, no one knew of them because those were, and this was super top secret.
Oh, okay. I didn't know how the timeline works.
Yeah, so it was before.
So I read them before I read it before the public.
That's so cool.
And actually, once I auditioned for the first book, Twilight, and then all the subsequent books, they knew I was going to do the series. So each time the next book was ready, like book 2 was ready, the process of me getting the script was top secret. They made me sign, I had to go and pick up a special copy of the book that was like where I would sign it, that if it came out of my possession, that I would be in trouble.
Wow.
So that was a really big deal. And very often
Yeah.
what that meant was that I would not get those scripts until very close to the recording. So
Oh,
I had
wow.
very little time sometimes to prepare, because they didn't want it to sort of be leaked to the public,
Yeah.
which is any high profile series like that, the Harry
Mhm.
Potter books, all
Yeah.
of. So no, those were when I auditioned for Twilight, no one knew of those books. And at that point, I don't think anyone really, again, thought it was going to be this big successful book. It was just like
Mhm.
a YA book that was
Mhm.
Mhm.
that they wanted to do an audiobook of.
I feel like
Yeah.
YA, like Twilight kind of like defines YA now. Like, you know what I mean? I feel like the genre didn't really exist in the way that it does now, right? Allison, you would
Yeah,
know
that was
more,
sort of
but
the golden age.
Yeah, I feel
yeah.
like it'd be fair to say it was one of the in that wave. Yeah.
So when you
Yeah.
say you didn't get the book until shortly before the recording, where were you? I don't know a lot about the industry, but like sometimes I thought audiobook narrators, you can just kind of like have your own studio like in your house. Did they make you like go somewhere and like do it in like a defined amount of time?
Yeah. So this was a time, so we're talking about 2004
Mhm.
and I started 2004, 2005. You would, yes, I was living in New York City, and at that time, it wasn't as common for people to do stuff in their own studios,
Mhm.
Mhm.
especially with such a giant, with a big series coming out of a big publisher. You know,
Mhm.
this was coming
Mhm.
out of Random House, now Penguin Random House.
Mhm.
So yes, 100%. I would do most of the books that I did were so sort of high profile. I was going out to recording studios and recording them in, professional studios with producers, with directors, with engineers,
Mhm.
people running the sessions, and I was just there to narrate. Now, cut to 2024. And post pandemic, a lot of narrators and voice actors like myself, and I'm also a musician, and I've had home studios forever for that. But now
Mhm.
it's more common. And I myself have done audiobooks out of my home studio. But at the time, all of Twilight books were done in recording
Mhm.
studios.
So were you like commuting every day? So was it like daily sessions or did you have to like travel somewhere and stay there for a while?
What, like
Like,
But they
jury
were
duty?
yeah, I don't know. It's like top secret compound, top secret audiobook narrator
not like jury duty.
compound.
But no, it was not a top secret compound. They were just various recording studios in Manhattan, in New York City. And no, I was living in New York City, so I
Mhm.
would just go to work to the recording studio like
Okay.
anybody that was going to work and spend the day in the studio recording, having lunch, doing more recording. We'd be there quite a bit, like we'd put in full days until we were done. So yeah, studios like that. In fact, I think one of the books we were in the same studio that Jim Dale did some Harry
Oh,
Potter.
that's cool.
Wow. That's big.
Although, yeah,
We're personally a
we
Stephen
are loyal to the
Fry.
Stephen Fry camp, but but I've been listening to more of the Jim Dale ones now. I think it's just like whatever you're familiar with.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's funny to hear about how the audiobook landscape from like a production side has changed so much, in the past few decades. I mean, I worked in publishing until a few years ago. I worked at Hachette. And I know like Hachette and other like the major publishers, they all have like audiobook studios now, like recording studios where they have people come in and do the books, and like audiobooks have just exploded. I think in a similar way that ebooks were exploding around the time when you were doing Twilight. Like these new formats are kind of coming and allowing people to discover books and in new ways.
Exactly. Yeah, it's always, listen, I learned a lot about publishing by being an audiobook narrator, working with a lot of them and really understanding what goes into, everything from the first of publishing a book to then all of its formats and its journeys. And it wasn't really a foregone conclusion initially that every book was going to have an audiobook. That just wasn't the
Mm.
case
Mhm.
back when, I first started in it. It was only really the big books that they knew were going to succeed, that were selling really well as books. And then they were like, yeah, why
Mhm.
not make a audiobook? Why not make a Kindle version? Because they were like, this is
Yeah.
popular enough, we're seeing the sales. So smaller books or books that were not selling well or more indie authors were not necessarily going to get audiobooks made.
Mhm. Yeah.
That changed. The landscape of that changed when the digital world started of audiobooks and audiobook sales, because then they weren't making audio CDs
Yeah.
anymore. Everything was just digital. You can just download an audiobook.
Yeah.
So that changed the industry as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely know when I was acquiring books, like it was paramount that we got the audiobook rights in the deal, because it was like it's like such a big format now. Like every book basically automatically, besides like the cookbooks, got an audiobook.
Yeah.
And even that, I feel like would be kind of cool to have.
Yeah.
There were some cookbooks that got audiobooks actually, but most of them didn't.
I'd love to narrate something about food.
Yeah.
What's your favorite book that you have narrated?
Ooh, wow. Well, going outside of the Twilight universe for a moment, since we've been spending time talking about that, I have a few favorites for different reasons. Like, I really loved this book I did. It was a scholastic book for young readers, and it was part of the Dear America series, Cannons at Dawn.
Oh,
Love those.
Yeah,
yeah.
and I did one of those books, and it was from the point of view of, it was like, I played an 11-year-old girl whose father was a soldier in George Washington's army. And so it was like this young person's perspective on historical fiction. And I love, love, love that book. Love doing that. I have a sample of that on my website where I have a listening library. I also got to do Nadia Murad's memoir, The Last Girl, which was, I mean, it was such an honor because her story is so intense. She won the, Nobel Peace Prize and went on to become a Goodwill ambassador. But, her journey of being, kidnapped by the Taliban and ISIS, and
Yeah.
just being, and then how she escapes and then becomes an activist. And she writes this memoir to be the last girl that this happens to. And so I narrated it for American audiences to kind of bring it to, so that was really touching and moving to do an audiobook like that.
That's amazing. Now that you're mentioning that, I think I did listen to that book. I read that book a few years ago, and I think I remember I was really excited where like I didn't realize it was you narrating it, and then I was listening to it. I was like, this voice sounds very familiar. Where
You
am
mean
I?
you're talking about The Last
The
Girl?
Last Girl. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that you're talking about it, I was like, yeah, but I did read that or listen to it a few years ago, and I was like, hunting on Goodreads, being like, is this Ilyana?
Yeah, that was an honor to do.
I was just talking about needing to reread the Dear America books yesterday with my girlfriend. And it's okay. This will definitely spur me into action. So you've only done one of them?
I only did one of them. I believe it was called Cannons at Dawn.
Cannons at Dawn. Okay. Start with that one.
Familiar.
For sure.
Yeah. We'll link it. Well, all of your stuff will be linked to the description, listener, but I'll specially flag Cannons at Dawn to listen to.
How long do you typically record at a time? Like when you said you were like in like doing full days for Twilight in the studio, like were they making you just like be there and be talking for like 6 hours straight, or was it like, and like what happens if you make a mistake? Like do you go back and like redo it, or is there a way to like edit it, or like how does that work?
So, yeah, I mean, the length of a book and how long it takes you to record in a studio is so dependent on like two major things, which is how long is the book? If it's a really long book, it's going to take you a while to do, and also the language. So for Twilight, it wasn't difficult language for me to do. But it was long books.
Mhm.
And no, we would try to go for, because it was long and they definitely were on a schedule, we would do like 6-hour recording days, which is pretty epic. But it wasn't like with, 6 hours in a row. There were plenty of breaks. I would drink copious amounts of beverages. I always had,
Mhm.
multiple teas and waters. I mean, I just had like
Yeah.
6,000 cups around me while I was
Many
um,
bathroom breaks.
yeah, it's a lot of drinking, a lot of taking breaks, having lunch breaks and all that kind of stuff. So it was hard. I would definitely say, narrating an audiobook like that is a marathon, not a sprint. And yeah, you can make mistakes. There's the editing software that they use and have always used allows you to make mistakes and redo things, and then they edit it, and the listener is none the wiser.
Cool. Do you sit or stand when you're recording?
That's a great question. I generally sit, but I am very mindful. And I've since I thought about it, I use a standing desk when I'm doing stuff at my desk because it's just so much more comfortable. But at the time, for the most part, I would sit, but I would be very aware of my body, my posture. I would really make sure that I did a lot of stretching and kind of got a good workout in so that I wasn't slouching, that I felt very like that I had really good posture. But a lot of people feel like standing allows them to um, feel less fatigued, but
Mm.
different preferences.
Yeah.
Besides good posture, do you have any like advice for people who are looking to start recording audio or narrating audiobooks?
I get asked that, and it's so interesting to me because people are like, "Well, what is it like to record for that long?" So I'll say something like, I'll say something to someone like, let's say I'm like, when you read to a kid when they, go to sleep or something, I'm like, that's the kind of amount, that's the length of reading most people do is like out loud. It's like a little children's book. And I was like, now imagine reading that little book for 6 hours. And they're like, wait, what? So they always like kind of freaks them out. I'm like, yeah, it's a long time. So I will say you need to get used to that feeling of reading out loud for sustained periods of time and really make sure it's something that you feel like you can do. So I often suggest that people volunteer in their communities and like go and read to kids in school. Go read to organizations that read to the blind, read to the elderly, read to anyone who feels like they can't read on their own, read out loud, stories that they would love. You'll get that feeling. Is this something I can do? And if by the end of just reading to some people for like an hour, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. It might not be the right thing for you. But yeah, getting a little practice in what that's like and what that feels like. In fact, when I lived in Brooklyn, I think I volunteered reading at preschools, just, reading children's books and, got interested also that way.
That makes a lot of sense.
In the abstract, I guess you think about, oh, well, you're just talking, like, it's not that much work, but then, people don't usually talk for 6 hours straight, and you don't
And
realize
it's
how
so not
exhausting it
just
is.
talking, you're reading, you're playing characters.
Yeah.
Telling stories, you're living difficult moments. Sure, if we are just I have a podcast too. If you're just in conversation, it's so casual and it kind of allows for lots of variance and not a lot of rules. So that feels like something that you could sustain for a while. But the minute you do this and it's about the word and the word that the author has written and staying true to that and giving a good performance like you would in any acting job, trying to sustain that for 6 hours, I think people would realize very quickly is an art form.
No, absolutely. I would have a hard enough time not like stumbling over my words, like for even like a full page, much less 6 hours.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
we also tend to read, we listen to audiobooks at like minimum 2 times speed. And I think that a lot of times when I try to read out loud, I will be reading in 2 times
And like
speed and
rushing.
forget that no, most people are not
Well, and
doing.
like in my head, it sounds like I'm saying the words clearly, but if I were to listen it back, it's like I might as well be slurring. Like it's not.
Yeah. No, I can
Yeah.
imagine takes a lot out.
It's really impressive.
Do you have a dream book like that you would love to narrate? Like it can be one that already has an audiobook, it doesn't. Is there a book where you're like, I would love to do my own
Who's
version?
your enemy in the audiobook narrator universe that you want to take down?
I would never say that because I really was on some committees with narrators. I belong to the union, the Screen Actors Guild, and the American Federation Television Radio, which became SAG-AFTRA, and all of us audiobook narrators became very friendly when we were working on our contracts, our union contracts and everything. So there's a lot of camaraderie. Sure, I'm sure we all look at each other and go, "Ooh, I would have enjoyed doing that book," or but a lot of times it's just like, it's really not about that because it's kind of pairing the right book with the right narrator, and sometimes that happens, or sometimes people have different ideas about that. I'm a voracious reader and I'm always reading, so I'm sure there's been books that I've thought of, oh, I would love to do, this, that. I think at this point, I did so much drama, whether it was YA or sci-fi or fiction. I got a lot of very dramatic, intense books. So I think now, and people still send me offers. I just decide whether I want to do something or not, but I would love to do just things that are lighter and funnier and, maybe a little zanier. I don't really have an example at the moment, but just something
romance books.
something like, just something lighter and is what I would say.
That makes sense. Yeah, I can definitely get heavy. What's your favorite book that audiobook that does already exist, not narrated by you? Like, do you have someone that you particularly admire, or you like their narration?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'll just bring up, just because at the moment it's just the first thing that popped into my mind, is just before I even started narrating, the book that I heard that kind of made me aware of audiobooks even was Jeremy Irons narrated The Alchemist.
Yeah.
And I, at that point, was not really aware of audiobooks, just didn't even know that was a thing and a phenomenon. And I just the way he told that story, The Alchemist, there was just something magical. And I loved that story. And there was something simple and magical and like reverential of how he treated the book, that I would say that's like what popped into my mind.
Yeah. Jeremy Irons got a great voice. Yeah. I haven't listened to the audiobook, but I can imagine that he would do a great job.
Yeah. And I haven't read that book in years. I think I read it like with my eyeballs when I did read it. So
yes,
check
me
out
too.
the
I
audiobook.
also read.
Yeah.
Read it with my eyeballs as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I just love audiobooks, especially now when I like don't have as much free time as I guess I used to. And so it's like a choice between like sitting inside and reading a book or like going outside and walking around or something, but can do both when it's an audiobook.
Yeah. Porque no los dos.
Yeah.
Question of when you like to listen, the times people like to listen. My focus has really been the podcast for the last several years that I co-host with my husband. It's called No, I Know. And it came out of us being two only children and always saying, no, I know. No, I know. The person would be like trying to talk to them and be like, no, I know. And they're like, do you really know what I'm about to say? So we started in 2016, and it was really about us because we'd been working together in the music business, and we were like, let's start a podcast about what it's like to work and create with the person that you're in a relationship with. You have to be married, but even if you're just in a relationship and you work and create together, because we were writing music together. And so that's when we started the podcast, that's what it was really about. And then we started to invite guests on and play music, our music, and the guests, it was really about people that we felt like were really doing good in the world and really serving their community with what they did, and hopefully it's an inspiring show that makes people kind of like, when you look out in the world and things are so overwhelming and can be so dark, that it's good to have examples to show people that are doing really good, that are rolling up their sleeves. So we interview a lot of people that run their own nonprofits or just an individual doing good. And so for a while, for the last couple of years, that's really been my focus, is hosting and hosting that.
That's awesome. I was listening to the most recent episode earlier today. And do you guys live near Assateague and Chincoteague Islands? Like, is that
We do.
currently you do? That's awesome.
Yeah,
So cool.
since COVID, we actually have, and not so far from there. And yeah, we were in our little camper. We have a little teardrop camper that we call Barbarella. And we were celebrating our anniversary. And we don't typically do a lot of episodes where it's just him and I, like bantering about life and stuff. And so that was kind of unusual. We mostly have guests. So that was just kind of fun to change it up. And people had written us that they wanted more episodes of just the two of us. So
yeah, it's good to mix it up. Yeah, we're kind of the opposite. It's like mostly just you and me, Allison, or like you and someone else.
Well, I was going to say, even, you know, at the beginning it was just Rachel and I, and then Rachel's gotten significantly, you know, busier in the last year and a half. So I do some episodes where I just have friends come on, but even recording an episode with Rachel, who's my sister, who we have this like history of recording, versus, you know, even if I'm recording with a friend who I've known for a while, it's a completely different vibe. And there's something that I personally feel, you know, I love the episodes that I do with friends, but I personally feel like our best episodes are the ones that, you know, we do together, and the ones that listeners like the best, or the ones where you kind of have that established back and forth and that banter.
Well, thank you so much. I am critical to this endeavor.
Unfortunately.
This is so cool.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to have been able to drop in on your podcast and share the Twilight love with you all. And any other burning questions before I head out?
I'm still just like starstruck. This is so cool. The Ilyana Kadushin.
Oh, that's awesome.
I asked on our Instagram stories whether like people had any questions, and I think we sort of answered the questions, but like so many of the responses were like, "Oh my God, can you ask this?" So
awesome.
Well,
I gave some good behind the curtain information there that people can. I got some new insights on that world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We're looking forward with hope and fear to the new Renesmee installment, if it ever comes.
Wait and see.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so where can our listeners, besides your podcast, where can our listeners connect with you?
So my website, ilyanakadushin.com, has everything, because you can link out from my site to the podcast to I run a nonprofit called Stories Love Music, which I founded in 2017, that teaches caregivers how to use music, since I've been a musician most of my life. Caregivers how to use music with people that have Alzheimer's and dementia. So they can link off and read about Stories Love Music, the podcast. There's an audiobook listening library. So I would say just go to ilyanakadushin.com and you'll sort of find the whole world, and there's lots of stuff to dig through. Okay. And of course, I'm on Instagram.
Yes. Yeah, that'll all be linked in the description, listener, so you can find Ilyana.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming. It's been amazing talking to you.
Okay, Allison, where can they find us?
You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at We Read It One Night, on Twitter at We Read It Podcast. You can email us, wereaditone@gmail.com. You can tell us how much you love Ilyana Kadushin the way that we do. You can check out our Etsy shop. Maybe I'll add a shirt that's just I Heart Ilyana Kadushin. Although I don't know if I'm allowed to sell something with her name on it.
I wouldn't.
I don't think so. In my heart, maybe I'll make one just for me.
Yeah. Maybe there's a brand deal out there somewhere.
And you can pop us a rating and review, and then you can go over to Ilyana's podcast wherever you're listening.
Godspeed, comrades.
Godspeed.